Hello, everybody, and welcome to another session of Stay Connected with the Worcester Senior Center. I'm your guest host, Dr. Michael Hirsch, still serving in the Department of Public Health for the City of Worcester and our Chief Pandemic Officer. Question is, are we still in a pandemic? So I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk a little bit about some changes in my life, and I know you guys have been such great supporters out there in Stay Connected land. I thought you'd want to know, and then also some things that are very near and dear to my heart about the month of November. So as we record this, we're recording it a little bit earlier than you're watching it, right? The predictions are that in late November, just about when everybody wants to carve up their turkey, there's going to be potential for a tridemic. You may have heard me talk last year about a twindemic, which was going to be the coincident peak of a new COVID variant and the flu season. Interestingly, last year, I was half right. The Omicron variant came in just about at the end of November when everybody was gathering for Thanksgiving, and that gave it a huge kickstart, and it was a huge surge. December, January, February were some of our highest months. But we didn't see the flu. And the reason is, at least that's suspected, is that people were still wearing their masks. We had a very large population that still believed that masks could protect you. I still believe that, but I don't think many of you out there are wearing your mask quite as much. Maybe you are, because as an older person, you're still in the high-risk age group where a mask can be very protective. And if you don't know who's coming over to your house for Thanksgiving, or if the people that are coming over to your house you know are not vaccinated, or if they're foolish enough to come over and they have cold symptoms, you could get hit. So that would be a twindemic if the flu also hit you, because now you're not wearing a mask. The third part of this tridemic thing that people are talking about is a virus that typically affects children much more, giving them cold and flu symptoms. But if they're very, very young children, they can actually get into the respiratory failure portion and end up in an ICU on a breathing machine. It's called RSV, respiratory syncytial virus. So those three things are all slated to peak towards the end of November. And what can we do about it? Well, there is an RSV vaccine. Adults don't get it, but high-risk children, like the children that survive a time in the neonatal ICU before they go home to mom and dad, they get this vaccination. And people, also children that have respiratory problems to begin with, bad asthma, bronchitis, bronchiolitis, all of these respiratory conditions, they are usually recommended to get the virus vaccine, which is called ribavirin. Anyway, what I'm saying to you is don't throw away your mask. Your mask is your friend. And you, as a elder in your family, can really help to promote good hygiene and good protection against another huge outbreak by encouraging visitors to your home to protect you. You have to look at the group of people that are gathering and act to protect the most vulnerable among you. So again, older than 60, respiratory or cardiac problems, diabetics, people that are obese, people with immune compromise, all of those people have high risk. And that's when they should be wearing a mask if they're doing indoor activities, but their guests should be considerate and wear masks. Now, obviously, if you're gathering for Turkey Day, there's large parts of the time that you're not going to be able to wear a mask. You want to eat that turkey. You want to have all the goodies that are laid out on your table. But when you're not eating, even if you're watching the greatest football game ever and you want to scream your head off, tell your folks to wear a mask. It's safer. And I suspect we're going to see a big surge in end of November, beginning December. I hope I'm wrong. When I come back to you next month, maybe we'll see that I was wrong. I'm happy to be wrong. And I've been wrong a lot. I think I've been right more than I've been wrong, but you know, this is the kind of thing that it's hard to make predictions, especially about the future. That's what Yogi Berra said, one of my childhood heroes at the New York Yankees. And he was right. It's very hard to make predictions. So what else can you do to protect yourself? Well, the sad state of affairs is that only 8% of the country so far has taken advantage of these new bivalent COVID vaccinations. More people have taken flu shots than they have those vaccinations, which tells you that there's a lot of distrust still about these vaccinations for COVID. I can tell you I would have gotten mine, but unfortunately I got COVID at the beginning of September. I'm not eligible to get my bivalent vaccination until December. But I made my wife get it. I made my kids get it. It's called bivalent because it not only attacks the original coronavirus, but it also goes after the Omicron virus variant that we got last winter. And hopefully it will cover a lot of these sub-variants that keep popping up. The sub-variants, as I talked about last month in the broadcast that we did, are existing because there's still large pockets of unvaccinated people. When they get COVID, they brew this new kind of variant. And the one that's coming down the pike to us now, we've been dealing with the BA.5 variant, which has been very transmissible, doesn't pack the punch of its predecessors, but it has caused a mini surge towards the end of August into beginning of October. Now the numbers in the end of October have receded, and what we're finding is what BA.5 took up as far as the percentages of positive cases is now being replaced by two variants called BQ1 and BQ1.1. I don't know how the CDC names these guys, but these are, like we described, it seems like every new subvariant is more transmissible, but is not as deadly. But if you get this vaccination, this bivalent vaccination, you'll have a lot of protection, not from getting it, but definitely from going into the hospital or going into the ICU or going into the morgue. So that's all in our hands. We can get these vaccinations quite easily. The city is continuing to do its Wednesday and Saturday public library vaccination clinics. We're doing one at the YWCA on Mondays, and UMass is doing their Stop the Spread effort at the Mercantile Center. So there's lots of options to get it. If you have insurance and you have a convenient drugstore, all you have to do is go online, have your kids go online if you're not comfortable with that, and dial up an appointment. There are many, many appointments. It's very easy to do through the drugstores. When you get that variant, bivalent vaccine, you can also get a flu shot at the same time. Very good idea. It's not going to be too much. Your arms are not going to fall off, and you'll be protected from 2 out of the 3 of the tridemic worries that we have. So that's really the best way that we could avoid a very messy Christmas time, is if we could get more needles in arms again to keep us safe from these new Omicron variants. I think the natural history of this is that the number of variants that now mutate will slow down the more people are vaccinated. And gradually will sink into a pattern which will be kind of like the flu, where every year we'll get the shot. And we won't have to get like 2 shots a year or 3 shots a year. But if you can get that whole array of 5 shots into you, you'll have a much easier road, even if you do get COVID. And I was fully vaccinated when I got COVID, except for the bivalent one, hadn't been released yet. And I had a mild case. It wasn't, I would say, like a moderate bad flu. And I was, back on my feet again in a week. And but I was mad that I got it, because I got it visiting my son, who was helping to dog sit for us as we were about to go off for a 2-week vacation. And he got sick the very first day we were there, and we quickly got out of there, and within a day I was positive too. So it's very transmissible. I wasn't with my son for much more than an hour in the 2 days we were there. So it doesn't take much to transmit it, doesn't take much to catch it, and you can avoid a lot of the worst part of it by being caught up with all 5 vaccinations. So that's all I can tell you really about COVID. Dr. Fauci, who many of you know is retiring as of the end of December after 57 years of service in the National Institutes of Health, is moderately worried about this BQ1 and 1.1 variant, just because of the timing where everybody's getting together, everybody's out looking at football games together, and masks have kind of been put into the back closet. Don't give up on the mask. And certainly, if you have a child that's sick, don't send them to school. If you are sick, don't go to school or don't go to work. And if you feel sick, don't invite people over to your house. And don't go to other people's houses. It's just common sense now. Now we have to be really using those old brain cells that have been kind of sleeping for 3 years because everybody's been telling you what to do. Now you're going to do what you used to do. Oh, if I don't feel well, I'm not going to that party. I'd love to have you over, but you sound pretty sick. Don't come. I don't want to get sick. That's what we used to say. But now it seems like it's a big deal. It has to be written out somewhere in CDC guidelines. No, you know what to do. And keep doing it. You were doing fine before the pandemic. And now we're going to get back to this new normal where you're in control of things. So monkeypox, it kind of fizzled out. Probably it was a summertime virus. It got around very quickly because there were a lot of gatherings of the high-risk group for getting this, which was gay males. They were, we had Pride Month, and we had lots of opportunities to party in various areas, in urban areas, and that's why the monkeypox cases are almost all from big urban areas. And I think we did okay with vaccine distribution, and here in Worcester, our AIDS Project Worcester has done an amazing job. They've given out over 800 vaccinations. The problem was we kind of tripped over ourselves trying to be politically correct about what to call the high-risk group that would potentially get this problem. Everyone was afraid to stigmatize people, and You know, the gay males had been stigmatized during the AIDS crisis in the 80s, and they were having flashbacks. And I get all of that, but it really doesn't make sense to just go around saying everyone can get monkeypox. It wasn't so. But it seems to be in our rearview mirror, and the most cases that Worcester had at its peak were 15, which is not many. And of the 75,000 cases in the United States, there was very little mortality. So it was a very different disease than COVID, but it was being kind of portrayed as the new pandemic, and it never was going to be that. So that's all I can tell you really about infectious diseases. I just wanted to kind of spend a couple of minutes talking about like what November is to people, you know. So I mentioned already Turkey Day. That's definitely my favorite holiday. It was my parents' favorite holiday. When they came over from Europe after surviving concentration camp, and they found out that here in America we did this day of Thanksgiving every year, they thought it was specially made for them and their family, because they were so grateful that they were able to survive, that they were welcomed here, and that they were able to make a new life here. So it had a totally deep meaning for my parents, especially my dad. Every year we would have Thanksgiving at our house. We didn't have a huge family because most of them were wiped out in the Holocaust. But we invited a lot of friends that didn't have a place to go. And, you know, I even invited, as I got older, friends in college who couldn't travel home, and my crew buddies when I was rowing crew that were stuck in New York and had no place to go. And my dad would always make a poem in honor of Thanksgiving, and they were always beautiful. Usually funny, but always very deep and sincere. And I carried on that tradition when I got married, and Thanksgiving transferred to our home, and we had that party for Thanksgiving, and I did poems and all different kind of goofy stuff. I tried some TV shows that we mimicked, and I tried some fake news kind of casts, and it's always been like my favorite holiday. And you know, it's everybody comes, everybody eats. There's no overriding religious connotation. There's something in it for everyone. You know, you've got the parade going in the morning, and you've got football all day, and you can dial up, you know, favorite movie now and watch it. So we used to pull up, my mother's favorite was Sound of Music because she was from Austria. Love that. But unfortunately for me, lingering in my mind every time the calendar rolls around to November is the date of November 2nd. Now, the news I was going to share with you is that as of October 1st, I hung up my scalpel. I'm not doing clinical surgery anymore. I'm working in the dean's office at the medical school at UMass. I'm working in the surgery department doing quality and statistic analysis, and I'm also still working for the city. So I have there's no reason to worry about me. I'm plenty busy. I'm very happy. But it was a weird feeling giving up surgery because that's been such a part of my identity. And as the weeks, you know, kind of dwindled down to October 1st, and even afterwards, there were some goodbye parties for me and some, you know, I was still operating in October, up until October, so people would come into the OR and they'd ask me these questions, and I hadn't even thought to think about these questions, but they'd say, you know, what's your most memorable case, and you know, what do you remember most about your residency or your internship or your whatever? And I have a million memories, lots of stories that I relate to our current day residents and medical students because a lot of them are sad. things were a lot tougher for residents and medical students back then. We didn't have any work hour restrictions, so we would end up being in the hospital for over 100, even sometimes 120 hours during the week with very little relief. And the only way I got through it, certainly, was having a life partner in my wife who took care of the homestead. You know, we had 2 little kids, and I missed a lot of those early years because I was stuck in the hospital. But when people were starting to ask me, what's my most memorable case? Well, my most memorable case was on November 2nd, 1981. And I may have shared this with you, but forgive me, this is cathartic for me to be able to share it with you again. And I tell it over and over because even if I make one person in the audience think about something differently, it's a win. I was sitting around a table like this on that night. It's a kind of a warmish November night for New York City. That's where I was doing my residency at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. And my best friend in the residency was sitting right next to me. Now, this guy was a former pediatrician who had decided to switch careers and go into surgery. I had already decided I wanted to be a pediatric surgeon, but he had trained already an extra 3 years than I had to become a ped surgeon. He was a brilliant, brilliant guy. And he was the guy in our residency class who took care of the rest of us because he was a Columbia man since he was an undergraduate. He had been an undergraduate there. He went to medical school there. He interrupted his studies to be a professional French horn player at the Juilliard School. Brilliant guy. His name was John Wood II. And he took a year off after our internship year to do research. So he had re-entered the residency. He was a year behind me. So I was kind of the senior on that night, and he was the junior. And we were going over our list of patients that we had to go see and evaluate. It was a very long list. There was close to 100 patients on this list. And in the ORs in those days, there was usually a round table, but like much bigger than this. And in the middle was this big vat of Skippy peanut butter. And around the Skippy peanut butter was an array of little 2-cracker packs of Ritz crackers and a couple of plastic knives stuck all over the vat of peanut butter. That was what we lived on. We had no time to eat. We had no time for snacks. But that was like the watering hole for us. We all went back to the OR lounge and got some peanut butter on a cracker, and then we were good to go for another couple hours. So we were sitting there munching, looking at our list, and the pager that my friend John was carrying went off. And on this pager, it said trauma was coming in. In those days, we didn't have the pagers that told you the whole story in writing. It just, had a certain ringtone if it was trauma or not. So he called down to the operator, and the operator said, your wife is calling. I have her on the line. Hold on. And so he talked to her. His wife was a young nursing student who was 3.5 months pregnant. And she was really having trouble with nausea in that first trimester of pregnancy. And she asked John, could he possibly bring her home some crackers because she couldn't keep anything else down. So he looked over at me and he said, Mike, I live right across the street. Is it okay if I just take a quick run across the street? And I'll be back really soon. So I said, sure, go, do your thing. And he said, would you take my beeper? Now, this is the oldest rule in surgery, is that if you take somebody's beeper, 5 seconds after they leave, that beeper is going to go off, and it's going to be the worst call of the night. That's how it goes. And I have a black cloud anyway. So he filled up his pockets full of those Ritz cracker packets and went out the door. And about 15 minutes later, the pager went off, and I called the operator, and she said, there's a gunshot wound rolling into the trauma bay right now. So I ran down there, and unfortunately it was my friend John. He had been shot right in front of the emergency room, and it was witnessed by a whole number of people. That's a whole nother story, because nobody really came forward to fess up to who shot him for almost 20 years after this. But we knew what we had to do for John. We had to open his chest and try to stop the bleeding and fill up his heart, because it was empty. And we were able to get him on bypass, like as if he was having open heart surgery. And we had called our cardiac surgeon, who was bombing down the West Side Highway trying to get to us. We had him on bypass in about 9 minutes, and the attending was there about 5 minutes later, and we worked on him for another hour, and we could not resuscitate him. So when people were asking me what's my most memorable case, I've had so many, thank goodness, positive cases. That's the one that pops into mind first, because I failed to save my best friend's life. I had his heart literally in my hand, and I couldn't do anything. So things happen for a reason. I don't think there's any reason I could think of that losing John this way was a good thing. But my chief of surgery invited Sarah Brady to come and talk to the House staff. I was at the time president of the House staff. All the different training programs had their own House staff representative, and they had elected me to be the overall House staff representative on the Board of Trustees. So I got everybody together in an auditorium, which oddly was the place where Malcolm X was assassinated about 15 years before. And we listened to Sarah Brady. Sarah Brady, if you remember, was the wife of the press secretary of President Reagan, who was shot trying to protect the president, shot in the brain. And at those days, it wasn't really clear that he was going to survive. He just passed away in 2020, and now they're charging his assassin, who's been serving life imprisonment with murder retroactively for that gunshot wound. And she had decided she was going to try to make lemonade out of lemons by forming the Brady campaign against handgun violence. And she talked to us, and it just hit me that what she was talking about, that there was just too many guns out there, and with so many guns out there, that these kind of incidents were going to keep happening, only more so. This was just in the decade where, as recently as the assassination of Bobby Kennedy in 1968, the NRA was agreeing with gun violence prevention specialists, saying we have to reduce the access to handguns. But they flipped when President Reagan came into office, and they were in that mode of trying to market and sell guns, and the notion that it's only a gun that's going to keep you from being attacked by a bad guy. And the sales were going through the roof, and all of those gun manufacturing companies were making a mint. So it was a very tough time to be trying to go against that current. But I joined in that fight, and that's how really the gun buyback that we do here in Worcester, this will be our 21st year coming up, December 10th, was born, because I thought it was the best way to reduce the number of circulating firearms. Now, I know people always criticize these gun buybacks because we're not getting gang members to come in and bring in their guns. We're not getting, criminals to come in and bring in their guns. But we're getting guns out of the homes of houses where people have made an evaluation, a self-evaluation, that the gun is a bigger risk than a benefit. And that's what we're trying to teach our medical students and the residents. When they're interviewing you as a patient, they're supposed to ask you if you have a gun in the home, and if you do, how do you store it, and what do you use it for? And then they ask a series of questions like, do you have any elderly patients and people in your home that may have depression or dementia? That's one risk factor. Do you have anybody in your home who has substance use disorder or alcohol use disorder? Those people are very likely to, substance use disorder people, to realize that they can sell weapons in exchange for drugs. That's a very good exchange rate, and that makes that gun a bigger risk that it's going to get out into the community and harm some people. Alcohol abuse can lead to depression, anger, so those are people that can commit suicide or be doing domestic violence. If there's a person in your household that has a history of anger management or domestic violence, that raises the risk of that gun. If you got a depressed teenager, somebody that's getting cyberbullied, or somebody that just doesn't fit in, or post-pandemic is really having a bad problem, that's another risk for that gun. If you have grandchildren or young children going through your home who are inquisitive, and if they find a gun, they'll think, wow, this is great, and they start pointing it around. Before you know it, it goes off. And that's how we sometimes will have one shoot a sibling, or one shoot a parent, or one shoot themselves. These are all the things that make the risk of the gun worse than the benefit. And that's a very important thing that we can help the patients derive every time they come in for a well patient visit or a well child visit. What we've evolved into now is, okay, you want to get rid of your gun. You decided, like we've gone through this checklist, 5 out of the 7 things that I mentioned are adding to the risk of the gun. You want to get rid of it? Yes, I do. I want to get rid of it. Well, what's the avenue to get rid of it? The gun buyback. Just like the DEA does their drug take-back day twice a year, and we get tons of unused pharmaceuticals that would ordinarily have either been thrown into the groundwater, which wouldn't be good, or, God forbid, somebody tries to fence the leftover oxycodone that you might have had from an operation, a fall, an arthroscopy, and that stuff is like gold on the street. So take back of guns is very similar. We just want those guns off the street. Now, in our town, we're very lucky. We have a group of blacksmiths that are taking the weapons that we collect, and they're making them into garden tools, and the garden tools are being given to community gardens around the area. We have one at UMass that's run by our med students, and they're using it and tilling the soil with it, and whenever they make the produce, they give it to the Worcester County Food Bank. So if you remember that old Isaiah proverb that people will beat their swords into plowshares and there shall be no more war, that's what we're trying to do. That's really what November means to me. And each year I dedicate the effort to John Wood. This past year I had to give a lecture about John at our old stomping grounds, Columbia, and his wife was there, his son, who's a nurse up in New Hampshire, the son he never met, the son who was born 6 months after he was killed. His son's son and his son's daughter, so we had John Wood the third and the fourth there in the audience, along with the district attorney, who eventually got someone to fess up to the murder. The murderer at the time John was killed was only 15 years old, but he fessed up to doing the murder while he was serving time for another murder in the prison, and his prison cellmate ratted him out, and he went to trial and is serving another life sentence. This is a tragic thing. I'm not saying that I wish it on a 15-year-old that they're in jail the rest of their lives. They had horrible circumstances probably that led to them trying to mug somebody. But just think about the image of a guy coming out of the hospital in a white coat, scrubs on. They accost him and say, "Give me your money." He pulls his pockets inside out and crackers fall out. And this 15-year-old is insulted, feels he's being disrespected, and blows him away. Why does that 15-year-old have a gun? That's something I want to finish up talking to you about. Some of you may not ever plan on having a gun in your house. Some of you have a gun in the home that's from a relative that gave it to you, or you inherited the house and there's always been a gun in this closet, or you had a spouse, a dear spouse that served in the military, had a weapon, a sidearm, kept in this drawer. You don't want to touch it, you never touched it. But some of you have young grandkids, kids that are part of street life in Worcester, and they're going out there packing pieces on a Saturday night. And it's not a well-kept secret at all. I mean, everybody knows that there are certain gang activities that are going on where everyone has to pack a piece. The cycle won't be broken until people come forward. And if you don't want to come forward, because we have these ERPA laws now, emergency restraint for possession of firearm laws, where you can report people that have weaponry that you're worried about, that it might be a danger to others or themselves. You don't want to report it. Figure out a way of taking the gun wherever they store this gun and bringing it in on the gun buyback day. If you can't bring it in on the gun buyback day, if you call the Worcester Police Department and tell them you have a gun that you want to get rid of, but it's not the gun buyback, the police will come get it. They will come get it, and they will give you a voucher, and I promise you I will get you the reimbursement that we give, these gift certificates in exchange for the guns. That's why it's called Goods for Guns. There are 2 local supermarkets, and we include like Target in there, and we have cards for Price Chopper and Shaw's and Market Basket, even a few from Wegmans out in Northborough. The point is, it's not been a matter of, oh, I'm coming in just to get the reimbursement. Most of the people, when we interview them after they've given up their weapons, they say, I'm just so glad to get it out of the house. I don't care how much you gave me. And many of them will just say, you keep the cards for the needy, and we end up giving them out to people that are really struggling. For them, it's an opportunity to make their home safer, and in so doing, make Worcester safer. This idea was kind of a little gleam in my eye back in 1994 when I started this in Pittsburgh, and it's really taken off now. If you follow, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or just read the papers, there's a major gun buyback almost every weekend all over the country. Somebody is doing a gun buyback, and thousands of weapons are being returned. Unfortunately, there's somewhere in the range of 400 million weapons, more than 1 per person in the United States. So this is a drop in the bucket. I get it. But I believe you have to chip away at stuff. This is too big a problem, and we've gotten way too far into the number of guns that are owned and manufactured to be able to fix this in even years. It's going to be a long term. Now, I hung up my scalpel after 36 years, people go into surgery because they're impatient sometimes. You know, they want to see the instant gratification, the happiness that you feel in taking a sick patient, understanding they need an operation to get better, doing the operation and seeing that they got better. That's a very different time course than your internist who sees that you have a hypertension problem and follows you for years to see that you're on the right meds and that things are staying okay, or your diabetes doctor, or these various other wonderful practitioners who have the patience of a saint. I never had the patience of a saint. But in this regard, I knew getting into it, I was not going to fix this in my lifetime. I'm going to be gone, and the guns are still going to be here. But I feel some of this is cracking now after hammering away at it for a long time. And I'm going to keep hammering until I can't hammer anymore. And I'm going to pass the baton to some really wonderful pediatric surgeons who have kind of following me in my place at UMass, and they're just as passionate about this as I am. So I think November's in the future will still hurt remembering John, but then on December 10th, when we get a big haul of guns in, I feel that elation. It's a little pre-Christmas gift, thinking that maybe we saved someone from a suicide, or we saved someone from an accidental shooting of a toddler, or a domestic violence event didn't elevate to the level of a lethal event. So that's what I'm thinking about this November. I certainly wish you guys a wonderful Thanksgiving. I think we do have a lot to be thankful for in Worcester, and one of the most eloquent descriptions of that, and I think that you might be able to find it online, is our former city manager, Ed Augustus, was just invested as the first chancellor of Dean College in Franklin, Massachusetts. And I was lucky enough to be invited to the ceremony. And in typical Ed Augustus fashion, he hit the nail on the head. He said, Worcester is finally got the confidence to be a leader and not shrinking away from that opportunity because of an inferiority complex. We are on the rise. Everybody in Massachusetts knows it. And that gives us an opportunity to lead by example. And the gun buyback is just another example, because Boston doesn't do them. Springfield does them very occasionally. Framingham has done a couple, but they're rare as hen's teeth, and they shouldn't be rare. And the Biden administration apparently has given DAs the opportunity of getting grants to try to get more money so that they can do them too, but not many DAs are taking them up on that. So, you know, hats off to DA Early here in Worcester County for being way ahead of the curve. He's been behind me for 15 years now. And DA Conti before him. So you may be asking, what's this hat? What's up this wear orange thing? I'm not wearing orange, except for the hat. But orange is the color that hunters use so that they avoid getting accidentally shot in the woods when they're out there in their tree stands. And so that's been taken over by the gun violence prevention movement. It was kind of the idea of the offshoot of the Brady campaign, to say, I don't want to get shot. And the ways I don't want to get shot is I want to try to figure out ways that we can increase the number of guns that are stored safely, increase the number of guns that are too dangerous to be kept in a home, and get them off the street with these buybacks. Think about that. Wear your orange on December 10th. And think about my friend John Wood on November 2nd. It'll be 41 years this year, and I still miss him. My most memorable case is my least favorite one. I'll stop here. Thank you very much for giving me your ear. and I'll see you next month.